Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. So today we've got a few interesting things to talk about. We're going to go over my predictions from last week. We're going to look at the AP poll. And we're going to get some thoughts from week 2 as a whole. But before we jump in to any of that, make sure you go ahead and subscribe for me. It helps me out a ton. So not last week, but the week prior, you may remember if you watched it, I went 1.5 for 5 on my predictions in week 1. I've doubled that up this week, and I'm giving myself a point for one that it could go on the fence, but I'm at 3 for 5 this week, meaning I am 4 for 10 overall. Now let's go ahead and take a look at those predictions. What I got right, we've got A&M getting struggles against App State. I'm taking it as a win. I knew they would be a problem for the Aggies. I said A&M would probably still win, but I'm taking the fact that App State coming in there and really causing havoc, that's victory for me. The Kentucky-Florida game, I said one of those quarterbacks would struggle badly, lose the game, get a lot of flack for it, start a narrative. And while I can't say I'm correct on the narrative yet, that I predicted will follow them throughout the rest of this season, I can at least say that I got it right with Anthony Richardson struggling and ultimately potentially costing Florida that game. As well, I got Tennessee outright, easy one to say that I won. I said they'd get their first win over a ranked team this year. What I got wrong, Texas gets blown out by Bama. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. And then I said Baylor would start getting some CFP appeal off of a BYU win. And now here's the thing I want to focus on. Am I 0 for 2 whenever I say this team is going to get blown out? Absolutely. Currently, I had that in the Notre Dame-Ohio State game, and then I had it in this most recent week with Texas and Alabama. Am I going to start doing it? Or stop doing it rather? Absolutely not. This is something that I'm going to keep doing until I get it right, and then whenever I get it right, I'm going to think I'm on a hot streak. You know how this whole thing goes. I'm going to keep saying that some team is going to get blown out. The problem is I'm not taking the cupcakes. Of course, Utah was going to go in there and just destroy Utah Southern or whoever it was. That's no fun. Predicting that a borderline top 25 team is going to get blown out against Alabama or that Ohio State was going to destroy the 5th ranked team in the country at that point, that's fun. That's at least an interesting prediction. I'm going to keep doing it. I'll probably do it for the Penn State-Auburn game or somebody that will end up being a very close game, but I'm going to keep doing it regardless. Now, let's go ahead and look at the AP poll. We are, like I said, 4 and 10 on the season. That'll keep progressing forward, and I'll keep updating you. I like to have those reminders to keep myself accountable as well as to either embarrass myself or give myself something to laud over everybody. The AP poll came out on Monday, I believe, and there's a lot of interesting weirdness that came out of that. The first one I want to focus on is where does Notre Dame go from here? I don't know how high they could feasibly get after starting 0-2, 1 to unranked Marshall, who, by the way, was the 26th team according to votes, which I found very funny. They would not even be scratching the surface if it would have been any other team besides Notre Dame. If they beat number 23 in the country, they're still not getting any votes. And when you look at Notre Dame, their schedule is still BYU, Stanford. Stanford gave USC some problems. They'll have to play USC as well. And you've got Clemson. They're all still on the schedule. If they manage to beat all of those teams, and I do not think they will, are they a top 8 team? We know they can't get into the college football playoffs, but that is an incredible resume, especially if you knock off BYU, USC, and Clemson. So where do they go from here? It's going to be very interesting to watch how their season unfolds and really to see how the fans react to Marcus Freeman now that he is 0-3 as Notre Dame's head coach. I personally believe that if you just hang in there for a little bit, it'll work itself out and be fine. But now Tyler Buckner's out for, I think, 4 months or something like that. AC joint sprain, if I'm remembering correctly. Don't quote me on that. But I do know he's injured and out for a pretty extensive period of time. So now they're going to have to roll in there with Drew Pine. There's a lot that has unraveled for Notre Dame, which I don't believe they were expecting, but I'm interested to see. They're going to be one of the coolest case studies because I don't know. Like, if they get to 8 wins, I bet that they're in the AP poll just because of who they are. But beyond that, just what happens with Notre Dame. The next one I want to talk about feels like an overcorrection to me because of what they set themselves up for last year, talking about the AP and the people who vote on the AP poll. Florida lost to Kentucky. I touched a little bit on that in my predictions, or my recapping my predictions from last week. But putting Kentucky inside the top 10 feels like an overcorrection that they had to make because they put Florida and Utah so high up last week. You can either look at it as justified because they've knocked off a top, I believe Florida was 12 entering that game, so 2-0, beat Florida, and you can think whatever you want. I would imagine a lot of Kentucky fans think it's justified. I personally just don't see it that way. I think that they overinflated Florida after their win over Utah and now have to either deflate both of those teams tremendously, which they're not going to do, or you have to overinflate Kentucky to make up for it and just hope it all balances itself out later on in the year. That's where I think we're headed. Florida and Utah getting to 12 and 13 last week was overkill. Now Kentucky is at 9 just to have to justify what I would call a mistake at this point that they made last week. The top 10 is full of teams that don't feel like top 10 teams right now. Kentucky, absolutely one of those teams. So, speaking of teams that beat another team, another ranked team, and end up, being 1-2 like Florida and Utah were last week, where 12-13, no point of separation. We did not get that this week after BYU beat Baylor in an even closer game than what we got from Florida and Utah. So my question is, how can you put so much separation between those two teams when you didn't do that with Florida and Utah? There are 4 teams between them. BYU comes in at 12, Baylor comes in at 16, 17, something like that, and you've got Miami, Utah, Tennessee, NC State, all in between them. Now, my question is, how can you go and watch the Utah-Florida game in week 1 and be like, okay, we have to put these two back to back because there's only a 1-point separation or whatever. Baylor and BYU went to 2 overtimes. Neither team had won the game by the end of regulation. The same cannot be said for Florida and Utah. It's a simple fact. What's the separation there to put Baylor so much lower? Especially when you boil it down, the Big 12 is a better conference right now than the Pac-12 is, or at least early portion of the season, that's what it looks like. So why not put Miami ahead of BYU, then go BYU, Baylor, Tennessee, Utah, NC State. And you can really randomize those last 3 however you feel. I personally am a Tennessee guy. At least for this season, I believe that they will be a really good team. I just don't fully get the logic here, and it feels very hypocritical, like, well, these two were bigger brands, whereas Baylor is a smaller brand than, Florida is, so you got to move this team up and do that. It feels like you're voting on brand more than you are on team, which I don't really respect and don't think that was the correct way to do it. So those are my big thoughts in the AP poll, and a lot of those will kind of filter in to what we talk about on my thoughts overall from week 2. For example, a team that's not touching the AP poll right now, and I would not suspect will for the rest of the season, Nebraska. They fired Scott Frost. They put in their associate head coach as their interim for the time being, and I think it's pretty safe to say Nebraska's redemption season, their chance to erase that best 3 and whatever team from last year moniker and really go out there and win some games, that's dead. Imagine having to be on a team where your head coach gets fired after 3 games. The Cornhuskers are 1-2. You have to watch Mickey Joseph come in, oversee the team, kind of learning on the fly how to manage such a big program like Nebraska. Then, outside of that, your team is now getting distracted. They went through this giant change before game number 4, and you're more likely to see media attention focused on, is it going to be Matt Campbell or Urban Meyer or Lance Leopold or whoever, as opposed to, Casey Thompson looked good this week. Such and such played a good game. This guy got this many interceptions. You're not getting the team buzz, more so, or at least you're not getting that buzz from on the field. It's all going to be coming from off of it, and that's how the rest of your season is going to go. There's too much noise for anybody to really succeed in that situation. There will still be standout players. I still think Casey Thompson, that's the reason I mentioned him earlier, is because I have been very adamant that I think he's a good quarterback, and I will stand by that, probably a little bit too long if he proves me wrong. But a 3-4 win year this year could absolutely be coming down the tracks again because nobody's going to be focused on the football. At this point, it's such a big brand and a big program, and it's easy to get a coach in there with how much money you're going to be able to throw at them on top of who Nebraska can be, that you don't have to worry about the football product that's on the field. So why would you? Especially if the new head coach gets a feeling that he's not in the running at all. What skin in the game is there for him unless he's going to go get another associate head coach's job? I don't see a lot of appeal here as far as Nebraska's season going forward. Another team that I would say is kind of in the exact opposite spot. They just got a new head coach as opposed to one walking out the door. They got a bunch of transfers that look really, really good. We're talking about USC, who is in the top 10, pretty comfortably in the top 10. I believe they are 7, if I'm remembering correctly. They look like a contender in the same way that Oklahoma was under Lincoln Riley. And what I mean by that is the offense is still working. All those transfers came in. Caleb Williams looks good. Travis Dye just ran for like 7-point-something yards per carry against Stanford. Jordan Addison still looks really good, but the defense, no, I'm good. I don't believe in it, and it's again just the same old song and dance that we keep getting from Lincoln Riley. At some point, this team has to evolve. At some point, Lincoln Riley, more specifically, has to evolve. I say this team like it isn't his first year at USC, but it's the exact same thing that we would have gotten at OU. It's the same look and feel and touch and smell as the Sooners have been under his watch. At some point, he has to learn what a defense is and how to create one and how to make one that can realistically stop the Bryce Youngs of the world, or at least hamper them enough to not be as impactful and let you get in there and have a chance to win the game. You can try to get in shootouts with somebody every week, but you're going to lose eventually. You don't have the structure there to truly make the difference and truly be the team you want to be. So there's Lincoln Riley, just to circle back to it, and this will be my final point, talking about the USC Trojans, at least for now. Lincoln Riley was very low on my coaching list of whenever I ranked the head coaches in college football. I believe it was just the top 10. I never did the Pac-12. He was not a candidate that I really thought deserved to be in the top 5 or in that range because you're an offensive coordinator right now. You're not showing the willingness to make a defense, or at least not getting the guys in there who will actually step it up and improve it and make it something that's formidable and useful. So until then, USC could absolutely be a playoff team based on brand, based on the fact that they don't have to play very many great teams. Utah does not look all that great. Oregon certainly does not look great. Somehow they got back in the top 25. I'm just not interested in what they're selling right now because we've seen what Lincoln Riley teams do against teams with defenses and offenses. It's not something that typically works out for them. Speaking of a team that has a defense and an offense, you just didn't get to see a whole lot of either one last week. Alabama, they almost lost to Texas. Kudos to the AP poll for putting Texas in the top 25 after that loss. That was, that was a top 25 game from them. You absolutely put them in. They just went head-to-head with one of the perennial powerhouses in college football and almost beat them. I think you could probably argue they should have beat them. But Alabama now, I would not be shocked if they don't win, or if they win every single one of their games for the rest of the year by like 30 points. Coach Saban does not take disrespect or underperforming, and that's exactly what they did against Texas. Vulnerability is not Alabama's strong suit. It's not something we see very often. And I think that will probably get scrubbed clean pretty soon, especially when you look at their next slate of games. Louisiana Monroe, that should be domination based on how college football has gone this year. I will not say it right now. I'm going to reserve my domination statements for teams that will end up being very, very close games. And then they have Vandy right after them. So that's enough to build up a head of steam before you have to take on Arkansas and Texas A&M. Texas A&M just lost to App State, so they're vulnerable, and I don't think Jimbo Fisher has the same level of fire and scary, if I may, that Coach Saban has in the point of really bringing his team back around. And A&M will be a reoccurring theme for these last 4, so just bear with me if you're an A&M fan. I'm not trying to just headhunt you right now. But there was a lot to digest from this weekend for A&M. Speaking of big teams falling, A&M being one of those, it's another week of giant upsets or, games that we did not expect to go the way that they ended up going, I think it's finally going to start leveling out before too long. The newest round of ranked schools falling includes A&M, Notre Dame again, Baylor, Florida, Pitt, Wisconsin, Houston. That's all your ranked schools that lost this week. It's a ton, but balance is starting to kind of approach us now. For the most part, the pretenders have been exposed. Oregon got blown out. They won't touch the college football playoffs even if they beat USC and just have a run of dominance. They're not going to mess around and put them against Georgia again. Just not happening. Notre Dame, they are statistically eliminated because we don't put two lost teams in the 4-team college football playoff. They're out. There's a lot of teams being exposed already that, maybe had they had just a better roll of the dice, would have made it all the way to the college football playoffs or a New Year's Six Bowl, and this whole exposing period would have been preserved for a bowl game. There will be more upsets. That's the nature of college football. It's just how things go. But this early in the year, it feels like nobody was ready to play football. Nobody truly was prepared to go out there and have to deal with these teams that were full of energy and excitement and that underdog mentality that a lot of these schools naturally have. So I think that now teams are starting to get more comfortable. They're more in rhythm with the game again. Everything's starting to come together for a lot of these programs. I think the upsets will start to dwindle down, especially in the top 25. The last one I want to talk about, thought number 5 for this past week. A&M stumbled hard, and I think that they might get themselves statistically eliminated from the college football playoffs this week as well. Losing to App State was not in the plans. It was not expected, but it shows that a couple things that I talked about to begin the season and something I mentioned, and then why I included them in my most overrated teams, it's starting to play a factor, and I think we're seeing a lot of it. We saw a lot of it, especially last week. Two things I focused on were the fact that I didn't like their quarterback situation because they couldn't figure out who their starter was. Haynes King has looked unimpressive to this point. And then they're a young team, and young teams typically can't find a whole lot of success, which again was also true. They couldn't handle App State's seasoning and their veteran leadership. It was something they struggled with all game and inevitably ended up in a loss. So for A&M to lose to App State is one thing. Now they've got to go play Miami, who I do believe will send them packing this year. This point will come up again on Thursday's video, so just be prepared for that. I'm going to predict Miami beats Texas A&M unless something catastrophic happens. And yeah, you can just go ahead and pencil that one in. It'll probably be the last bullet point, so there you go. A&M still has a lot of growing up to do. That's something that I think will improve as the season goes on. But with that youth, I also don't know that they're prepared to bounce back and truly be a better program after a loss to App State. I think a lot of it's going to be a mental game, and I don't know that these players have been through enough at the college football level, maybe even at the high school level. You got to remember, a lot of these kids don't lose very many games in high school. I don't know that they can bounce back. So my big question for them is, let's say they go out against Miami and Haynes King struggles again. Do you pull him and try to put, Max Johnson or Connor Wegman in there or, see what happens? Or do you just let Haynes King use this as a development year and hope that you see enough improvement as time goes on for him to be your long-term starter? Something we're going to have to watch out for sure. But those are my big thoughts. We went over my predictions, talked about the AP poll. So what do you think about this most recent week? Is there a team that surprised you a ton? Is there a team you think that is a dark horse to really make some noise as the season progresses? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. But for now, that is episode 32 of the From My Perspective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.